Welcome to the 18th episode of the Hail Mary podcast. I'm A. Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to give our hot takes on UTSA's record-breaking win over Western Kentucky and throw some Hail Mary shots down the field for our listeners to love or hate. So let's get started. This game was billed to be a thriller, and it lived up to the hype. Frank Harris and the Roadrunners put on an offensive show for the ages. This time the offense started strong, taking just 47 seconds and 3 plays to score first on a 30-yard touchdown pass to J.T. Clark. While the Runners took the early lead, Western Kentucky would not go down without a fight. Overall, there were 7 lead changes in this game. The Roadrunners regained the lead early in the third quarter on another touchdown reception by J.T. Clark and held the lead for the rest of the night. In arguably his best game, Frank Harris threw for a career-high 349 yards and 6 touchdowns. To top it off, he added a touchdown reception on a trick play pass from Josh Cephas. On the other side of the ball, the defense struggled to contain Bailey Zappi, giving up a season-high 670 yards and 46 points. However, with the game on the line, the defense came up with a huge stop as Clarence Hicks made a diving interception on the 3-yard line with 43 seconds left to steal the victory, 52-46. The Roadrunners are now bowl eligible for their second year in a row as they go 6-0 for the first time in program history. So, let's talk about this historic win.
This is kind of tough to actually prepare for because we didn't actually see it live, and this is, I think, our first time that we haven't seen one of the games live, and then we watched the recording, so then we had to go back and figure out, okay, here's what went on. So, different experience for us. We were at ACL, so we were following along on the ESPN app, and we were getting those updates. It was just interesting to see the back and forth. But, I think overall, I just go back to my 2 early predictions from last week. What did I get wrong? Well, obviously I got the score wrong for both. I said it was going to be 34-31, and I thought that UTSA defense would impose itself on Western Kentucky's air raid. I thought there was going to be more of a lockdown from UTSA. It didn't happen, but what I did get right, and anybody can go back and listen to it, but I said that Frank Harris would outplay Bailey Zappi, and he did. We're going to gush about him a little bit more, but, I think this really comes down to Frank really just being a great conductor. He made sure that people were getting the ball, and he was getting it out quick. Again, back to what I've said before, which is where I think is more of his forte in a passing game, is getting it out quick, making quick decisions. And it paid off. That Western Kentucky defense is probably a lot better than they're giving credit for, but that offense doesn't really help them much because I would go back to the theme of this season, which is UTSA is just better situationally. When they needed to, they made plays. When Western Kentucky needed to make plays, they didn't always come up with that. It seemed like it was a 50-50 proposition with them. And so I think if Western Kentucky really wants to look at it, they need to go back and look at some of these drives that they had that, honestly, they just needed crisper play. Mm-hmm. And something that UTSA took care of where they didn't.
Yeah, honestly, I'm glad that we didn't watch this game live because I'm not sure that my blood pressure could have taken it. But, the other thing before I get into the game itself, I was probably more nervous about this game, not just because of Bailey Zappi and the air raid and the fact that we've had issues with pass protection, but because personally for me, it kind of took me back to another ACL experience watching a game on ESPN. So I'll take you guys back in time to October of 2017 when we had, we kind of have had a lot of discussions about this season and how it kind of relates to 2017. That season, we had high expectations, had a great start. We were playing North Texas early in October. Ben and I are at ACL, and we're walking back, watching the game, on ESPN, and we get to the fourth quarter, and we see that, UTSA is up 26-22. North Texas, has the opportunity to score. They turn it over on downs. UTSA gets the ball. There's not really that much time left in the game at this point, and it's feeling like we're going to win. And then the next thing you know, we end up having to punt. We've got North Texas pinned to the 2-yard line, and then somehow Mason Fine just comes out blazing, and the next thing you know, they score, and UTSA, it doesn't have the opportunity to come back, and it sort of to me was like the turning point in the season where, we had these high expectations 2017 and then the wheels kind of started to fall off. So, there was a little bit of, trying to put that out of my mind, that disappointment of, that experience. It's almost like a PTSD experience, and hoping that this one was going to turn out differently. And every time I look and I see that, lead change going back and forth, my heart would just kind of start jumping a little bit. Not to mention watching the ESPN app, it was a little bit frustrating at times too, because obviously whoever was doing the stats doesn't know the difference between offense and defense. They've gone back and fixed it at this point, but I think it was the second touchdown. The app initially said that Kelechi was the one who scored the touchdown instead of Tyke. It was kind of like, okay, well, obviously Kelechi does not play on offense, so if this was an offensive scoring drive, this is wrong. And then later on, when I saw that Josh Cephas threw, a pass to Frank Harris, at first I didn't realize it was a trick play. I just thought somehow whoever was, following the stats on ESPN had screwed up again. But anyways, back on the game, I think that this really came down to the fact that Frank, stepped it up another notch, and had he not had his best game, things could have turned out differently. But, because he was able to really put the offense, take the offense to a different level, and we were able to start fast. That's something that we haven't been able to do. We've gone 3 and out on, I think, almost every drive we've had, or at the first drive of the game. So this time we were able to, get the ball. We were able to score fast. I think that really kind of set the tone.
Yeah, and I think really what it came down to was, I think they really wanted to do some ball control. They wanted to, I think, establish that run game. But the problem was that Western Kentucky defense just gave them too many good looks. Mm-hmm. I would say for passing situations, and Frank took them and took advantage of it. That secondary of Western Kentucky was abysmal. Their starting cornerback, graded out PFF wise as 54, 47.7, and 44.1. That is below average to poor play. And to be honest with you, I just don't, because of the lack of pass rush, because of the lack of really just good sound technique, mm-hmm. That's what I think really helped UTSA. Everybody's been talking about, well, the defenses are really keyed in on Sincere, and they're stacking the box, and so it's opening up things for the passing game. But at some point, a defense is going to get, I think, smart and start changing up these coverages and mm-hmm. maybe show a stacked box and fool Frank into, throwing into a bad situation. It hasn't happened yet, but I think that some of these defensive coordinators are going to have to get savvier, because we're now 6 games into the season, and if you're not going to change up, if you're just going to be stacking the box, I honestly think Zakari, Josh, and JT are just going to have some career years. And honestly, maybe not. I'll back off on saying career, because you're essentially, instead of throwing to one receiver that's going to get a whole bunch of yards and a whole bunch of, make a ton of catches, where you have that one star receiver, we've got 3 great guys, mm-hmm. and Frank spreads it out to all of them. So really, I think that's really what it could have come down to is, Western Kentucky thought Frank's not going to be able to outduel Bailey, so mm-hmm. we're just going to roll the dice and give him the passing looks, and here we are.
Right.
6-0 now. So, I think rushing the ball, they, obviously, Traylor afterwards said that, they gave the keys to Frank. So, he was audibling in and out and changing plays at the line. So, again, you see that maturation, you see everything happening there. And I think that's what really helps this UTSA offense kind of roll along.
Yeah. In terms of the run game, it was good to see BJ Daniels in there, and saw that he got some meaningful snaps. He hasn't really played on offense at all this season. I think the last time we really saw him offensively was last season, maybe the UTEP game. He saw a couple of snaps in the Lamar game, but not really any meaningful playing time. And so to see him come in replacement for Brendan Brady and really get a couple of decent runs. You could really see his physicality. So I thought that was, good to see that we were able to get something going on the run game, even though, it really was the passing game that made the difference.
What was bizarre, though, is that even with BJ in there, it just seemed like Frank was really going to the pass. And I would have liked to have seen, in hindsight, would like to have really seen Frank kind of make sure that we run the ball a few times. Because with Western Kentucky, it doesn't take them very long to score. I mean, we scored on 3 plays. They did the same, and it was a 95-yard drive. It was a great punt by Lucas Dean, and before you knew it, Western Kentucky was scoring. So they didn't really need a lot of time, but I think the big difference here in terms of which we'll talk about a little bit on defense, is the fact that Western Kentucky, even though they run the air raid, they really look for that big play. They're looking to go downfield, and I really felt like UTSA took that away. However, Western Kentucky wasn't able to take that away from UTSA. JT Clark was able to make a ton of big catches downfield, and I think really that's what makes the difference, is that those big catches for UTSA were fruitful. We're scoring on those, as opposed to, I would say, Western Kentucky that wasn't able to score on some of those.
Well, yeah, and can we talk about that wild 5th/6th drive of UTSA where it's 2nd and 10 and Frank fumbles the ball, but it sort of like bounces back. He recovers the ball himself, manages to get a 3-yard gain out of what should have been a loss. A couple of plays later, on that same drive, he throws a pass that's tipped, which results in an interception, but then the guy is returning it, running towards Frank. Frank punches the ball out. Zakari manages to recover it, and then it ends with Frank throwing a touchdown pass to Oscar Cardenas. It was like the craziest drive I think we've seen in UTSA history. I mean, if that didn't epitomize the roller coaster, of the game, that kind of feeling of the game, I don't know what else did.
I think it also shows the maturation of this team, though. I mean, I remember watching that drive, and at no point did it seem like UTSA was frazzled. It seemed like Western Kentucky was the one that kind of did sort of a peak of, we got the interception, but then they get
immediately
leaves it back, and then they allow UTSA to still drive down for the touchdown, a wide open touchdown for Oscar. It just seemed again like UTSA was just steady, and that's what the offense really was. And I think, as much as we criticize at times, this UTSA offensive team, you heard it from the players too. Nobody thought they could keep up with them. I don't know that necessarily that was the truth. I think it's just, especially at home, they seem to kind of struggle with their execution. On the road, it just feels like they can put up any points any time. Right. So, with this amount of weapons, it kind of led you to, at least for me, when I was thinking about prediction-wise, how could this come out, or what would be the outcome? I never felt like UTSA wouldn't be able to win in a shootout. I just thought if UTSA is going to lose, it's going to be because they make the mistake, not Western Kentucky. And, as you did in the recap, it was Western Kentucky that had that. I mean, let's go to the defense and talk about them right now. While the defense struggled, I thought Greg Luga kind of epitomized it really well post-game with his video with JJ. And that's because he said, I don't think it was as bad as it really looked. And honestly, I didn't feel like it was that bad either. I kind of already hinted it already, that this Western Kentucky, and Bailey Zappi in particular, loves to go long. It just didn't happen this game for them. It was tough for them. Like, it just seemed like it's going to be like death by 1,000 cuts. Yes and no, because Western Kentucky seemed to get frustrated on offense because of the fact that they had to grind it out against the defense. Yeah, the defense gave up a couple, some big plays. Yeah, there was some other stuff. It happens. I mean, it's in this era of offensive football, it's difficult for a defense to really keep up with many of these offenses, but they slowed them down to, plenty of time, especially in the second half, that I think it really frustrated Western Kentucky. I will say, though, it was bizarre to see UTSA come out and drop 8 and only had 2 down linemen.
Right.
It seemed like they were sending 2, maybe 3 at Zappi. Bizarre, because they did that last year against UTEP, and it was 21-21 at halftime. And that was really quite below average UTEP offensive team. They have weapons, but it wasn't it's not as explosive as this Western Kentucky team was. Again, I think looking back, Western Kentucky should really look at that first half and say, we didn't make UTSA pay for being, dropping back all those guys.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Traylor said that he underestimated Western Kentucky's, O-line, and that was the reason why, he thought he could get away with it, and then it, became pretty clear that they needed to make an adjustment, which they did right before halftime and then into halftime. And they were able then to get, more pressure on Zappe. And what Western Kentucky did that was successful in that first half was then just switch over to their run game, which they really haven't had much of a run game all season. And so, they were able to kind of make that switch, be successful getting some runs. But again, they had to work a little bit harder because they were going with the run game versus these, really long passes that take, less than a minute drives downfield.
Right.
But, once they really switched to a different look in the second half, it seems like it kind of slowed Western Kentucky down. I mean, it doesn't mean that they didn't score. They did score. Again, they had to work a little bit harder for it, and Zappe was getting much more pressure on him.
And with our secondary, which actually was really good, I mean, to be honest with you, Tariq Woolen, I think, had it thrown at him maybe three to five times, I would say he was looked at. That's our top corner, essentially. Ken Robinson, I thought, played really well. Corey Mayfield had, I think, the toughest, but even him, I thought he had a good game. Where our soft belly is again is the safeties. Antonio Parks struggled mightily. Rashad struggled mightily. They're just, when you go into the safeties are never really kind of coverage type guys, so they're going to struggle no matter what if you put them up against somebody. With Rashad, it just, again, felt like, I don't know, something's off with him this year. I feel, it just, from the previous years, he just seems different. He's struggling with, I think, coverage, and I think teams know that, so they're targeting him a little bit more. Parks has struggled at times. He was exposed this game, but, to be honest with you, I always thought that he was a good safety. I don't think he's a great safety, but he's good enough for this team, and, I think this is his worst game since, like, last season, where, I think early in the season we were like, why is he playing? He's really struggling in this defense. This season I haven't really felt like he's been such a liability. It's been sort of the combination of the two of them that have really been, giving us trouble this year. So, I think that the defense played well. They were able to get to Zappe at least a couple of times and at least hit him. And, again, if you're playing this type of offense, if you're able to get to the quarterback and at least get a couple of hits on him, it starts giving you that twitch. So right. I think late in the game, I think he felt something that really wasn't there, and that's Zappe is always good at like getting the ball out quickly, and that last game-winning interception essentially from Clarence Hicks, it was behind Stearns, the receiver. Stearns had fallen down, but it was behind him, and it just seems like they were off.
We were also aided, a couple of times by their receivers not making catches that they absolutely should have made catches on, which also kind of helped us. But, at the end of the day, the defense came up with a big play when we needed it. And I think, like you said, you just have to get to a win. It wasn't a pretty win. It wasn't the win that we wanted exactly. But at the end of the day, it was a win. It was a 6 win. We're bowl eligible now, and, we can kind of write our own history from here.
And I'm glad you brought that up because, too often you look at a game and, I would say from a fan perspective, the first thing you want to say is, wow, we gave up 46 points. What went on there? This was just terrible defense. But to be honest with you, Western Kentucky had a really good offense. And the fact that they were able to slow them down at times and to make, again, the situational stops, because that's what the defense did do in the second half. You mentioned it. We were able to make a couple stops, and the offense took advantage of it and built a lead. And really, again, that becomes the difference in the game. And had Western Kentucky, I think, been much better situationally in the first half, we could be talking about how this game turned at any point. So I did want to talk about sort of the receiving, which I think kind of tells a story of the frustration, I think, from the Western Kentucky side and then the elation from the UTSA side. Stearns, I think it's Jarrett Stearns, had 16 receptions for 195 yards. Incredible, right? 16 catches, 195 yards. That's huge. And then you come to our big play guy, 7 catches, 160 yards. Yeah, you can start looking at the, obviously the averages and say, okay, well that should be able to tell the story. But that was, I think, the problem for Western Kentucky was that Stearns ends up with a 12.2 average, and you have JT Clark with a 22.9. It just tells you that we were able to make the plays when Western Kentucky couldn't. And that really, I think, frustrated the Hilltoppers overall.
Absolutely. And then on special teams, we were kind of a mixed bag there. There were some great moments and some not some great moments. We seemed like we were struggling with kick return protection in the first half. They got a couple of big returns. And then we had the issue with Sticks, where on 2 punts of the night, he muffed the first one, which then led to Western Kentucky recovering it and getting a touchdown on that drive. And then the second one, he was able to recover and get a pretty good drive. But the fact that he, had to, kind of struggle to get that ball and then get it picked up so that he could get this return. I mean, what would that return have been had he handled the ball appropriately? He took it 38 yards with his fumble, but if he might have, caught it and handled the ball appropriately, perhaps that might have been, a touchdown. Who knows?
Well, and then that fumble ends up becoming a touchdown for Western Kentucky. So, it swings the pendulum. So, to your point, like, we get a punt return, great. But I think that's been the story with Sticks, hasn't it? Like, he's either been solid all year, just like catching the ball and making no return, or then he has those moments when I think when the punts come, you just kind of hold your breath and wonder what's going to happen. That's never good for a punt returner. Like, right. It's just, you don't want to be saying that about, actually, I would say any of your returners. You don't want to be holding your breath and crossing your fingers and hoping they can catch the ball.
Right.
Going back to your first statement about the kick coverage, I never really got to dig too far into this, but I was wondering if maybe this is where the depth has been challenged. We know we've had injuries, and I didn't really get a chance to look to see if, we've had different coverage guys now. I think that's part of the, could be part of an issue, as the season kind of wears on. But, we've talked about it repeatedly, 8-game stretch here for UTSA. We're now in game 6, so we're down to the last 2 games. And you see how, even though you do have depth, it still affects you in other facets of the game. And right. I think that, we could potentially say that it is with the kick coverage. If not, then it's just the guys just overrunning their, not filling their assignments and being what they're supposed to be. And so that can be part of it too. But I think as we kind of wrap up this whole recap here, Traylor, I thought, really rolled the dice a few times, and he's been doing that all season. Mm-hmm. But I think, he did say afterwards, or maybe it was today, that he said, we really need a bye week. Yeah. And that gets to be a little bit of a head scratcher, because I know that you need it, but it almost feels like it's the beginning of an excuse. Like, this is why we're not going to perform well this week, because we're so beat up. So are other teams. Like, at this point, it may be trying to get some empathy or whatever, but for the most part, I don't think you really need it. I think your team is good, and I think you've got depth on this team. And I think one thing just to realize is, if you start saying that, it's going to start creeping into fans' minds, and all of a sudden you start getting those ready-made excuses for, a letdown somewhere. It's going to happen, and I think we're going to talk about it a little bit more here. But any final thoughts on the game?
No, I think we covered everything. Let's talk about what we learned from the game.
Well, the offense can actually start out pretty fast and get us on the board right away. And while that's happened, against Lamar with a field goal, it hasn't been efficient. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the best way for this UTSA team to really jump out there, is that they really need to establish themselves on offense, and you really don't want the offense, to use your words, taking too long to get off the bus. Mm-hmm. They need to get off the bus with the defense if the defense is out there and they're taking care of business. So it was good to see them march down the field. Now, the expectation shouldn't be that it's going to take 3 plays to score.
Sure.
That's unrealistic. But a nice drive to start out, to get Frank in rhythm, maybe get Sincere going a little bit, but definitely start involving, if you get Frank in a rhythm, you can definitely start involving the receivers right away, and you put any one of those guys in space, that's trouble for any opposing defense. So I thought that was one of the bigger things that we learned, that this team can do it.
Right.
Now let's hope that
they can repeat it.
For the last 6 games, they can make a habit of this. I guess the other thing that we've learned has been that the program has made some incredible strides this year. Bowl eligibility by I think it's the first weekend in October.
Right.
Or actually it's the second weekend of October. That's incredible. Like, this is the earliest we've been bowl eligible. Have there been opportunities before? For sure. But this is a different team, and I think that has also been one of the themes on our podcast this season has been, it's a different team.
Yeah, I mean, usually we're waiting until the last game or the second to the last game to find out if we're going to make it to that 6th win. And now to have it happen so early and almost to be an afterthought, everyone was so excited about beating Western Kentucky, having a great game, that it was kind of like, oh, and wait a second, we're bowl eligible. It was just something that we've been striving for years to get to that, and it seems to always take the whole season, and now here it is, halfway through the season, and it's already an expectation, and now it's, okay, so we know we're going to go to a bowl. How can we continue to be successful so that we can get to the championship for, Conference USA, and not have that, again, be something that we're grinding out, hoping somebody else loses, hoping somebody else, picks up a win for us to give us help. Now we really control our own destiny.
And I think that's what exactly the last statement you made is hits the nail right on the head, because we've always been having somebody else control our destiny. Now we control it, and that's, I think, the biggest part of this, is that's what makes this team different. Mm-hmm. I do want to go back real quick to something you had said, is I think really, I'm glad you brought up that story about North Texas, because I think that everybody had sort of the same fear.
Right.
So when we talk about the stride, and all of a sudden, oh wow, we are bowl eligible, I think the crazy part about it was that I think everybody was wondering, is this that same type of game where all of a sudden things may go wrong and it spirals us, down the rabbit hole where, we are waiting till the last weekend to be bowl eligible. Mm-hmm. But, I think that was, once we started making, getting some wins against some of these teams, it became clear that we were gonna be bowl eligible, that it was gonna be sooner than any one of us thought, whether it was Western Kentucky, whether it was Rice, whatever. It didn't matter at that point. It was just, things are going to happen faster, and it's going to be really cool, because to use Traylor's statements, there's a lot of firsts here at UTSA that you can do, and it's really cool that some of these firsts are happening this season, that happened last season and are happening again this season. So it's just honestly really happy for the team.
So that kind of goes into, one of the other things that we learned, because we've talked so much about our culture pillars, and that's something that you hear Traylor talk about over and over again, and he likes to talk about control what you can control, win the day, and then at the end of this game, we saw some evidence that maybe we're not as good as living our culture pillars as we say that we are. You saw some of the players going after people on Twitter. It was just kind of interesting to see, some of that banter back and forth, and a little discouraging, because on the one hand, you get it from a player's perspective, right? You want the fans to support you, believe in you no matter what. But on the other hand, when the players start going after the fans, that's like shades of Frank Wilson right there. That's just not a good look for UTSA. We've already got enough crazy on Twitter. We do not need the fans and the players fighting. So it was good to hear Traylor talk today, one of his media interviews, about the fact that he called out some of the players and kind of took them aside and said, hey, this is not part of our culture. You cannot go after the fans. Let the fans be the fans. You can't go after the media. If they choose you to be the underdog, you can't control that. All you can control is the product that you put on the field. So it was good to see him say that. But then, on the flip side, he also admitted that he violated that culture pillar himself. Because he did say that he talked with the team about the fact that they are the only undefeated team that is not ranked. But he was trying to use that as a motivation. And on the one hand, I get that because, obviously this team seems to be motivated by being the underdog. And so at some point, they're not going to be the underdog anymore. And so this is the only thing I think that they really have going for them in terms of, okay, we still have that underdog mentality, right? We're not ranked. We've accomplished everything else. We're going to be favored in the rest of the games this season. And we're going to have to learn how to be the favorite. So if I can still use this kind of like underdog motivation, I'll do that. But, on the one hand, if you've got Traylor calling out some of these players, but then, violating the same pillar himself, that's also talking a little bit out of both sides of your mouth. So
lots to unpack right here. So I'm going to go back and start with the fact that you had said that it felt like the players thought that fans aren't supporting them, right? There's really two different things. The UTSA fans are going to support you. However, if you're asking them how they feel about a game, they also know that you're 18 to 24-year-old guys, that you're a roller coaster of emotions, and though we've seen a good product over those 5 games, we also remember Memphis. We also remember some of the other ways that this team has gotten burned. So a prediction's a prediction. I mean, hell, look back at what we did. We were set 7-5.
Yep,
at the spring. We doubled down essentially, or at least I was 8-4 for the spring. I came back with you to 7-5. I thought UTSA was going to lose this game, and there was several reasons for that to happen. Now, I changed it last week in my too early prediction, but that was because I had new data. Now I had seen UTSA play. Now I was like, well, it's still a bad matchup, but I think that UTSA can manipulate Western Kentucky enough to be able to cause some turnovers and to win this game. But to start going after the fans, I think as it is, UTSA fans go after each other. There's always that, are you a real fan or not? You don't need a player coming out and really kind of
feeding the fire.
Yeah, feeding that again. We don't need that. We've already had controversy with the damn flag. We don't need any more getting lit into here. So, really I would say to the players, like, look, we support you. But just because we pick against you, don't voice it. Don't come back out on Twitter. Don't come
use it as motivation. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, the player needs to go into the game believing that they can win. Because if a player goes into the game and they don't think they can win, they're not going to win. I mean, sports is just as much of a mental game as it is a physical game. Which is why we have mental and physical toughness as one of our culture pillars.
Exactly.
But, you also have people, especially in the media, that are going to look at it objectively because that's what they have to do. No one's going to listen to somebody in the media if they're a homer all the time, picking that team. That's just not realistic. At some point, they're going to have to hear, from the media, this is the reality. Here are the strengths, here are the weaknesses, here's how this could play out. But that doesn't mean that person is completely biased against the team. I mean, sometimes they are, but for the most part, and especially the people that were getting called out this time, they're not necessarily people that are, completely biased against UTSA by any means. They're just trying to look at this objectively.
Right, and I think that's a thing that kind of, I think, hurts the players, is when they're looked at objectively as opposed to, I think, at times, feeding some of their ego, the fact that they're now 6-0. Dude, we're happy for you guys. We really are. But I think I speak for a lot of the people that do these projections and say, we would love to be wrong. But it's just a prediction.
Right.
It's not a reflection on you. Really, what I also wanted to reiterate was just don't draw a line between the UTSA fans. We fight with each other as
enough, yeah.
as well as any other fan base. We don't need any more going, oh well, so and so the player called you out because he said you don't know anything. It's like, okay, whatever.
Like, I just, again, it was like harkening back to the shades of Frank Wilson. All of a sudden I was thinking, oh gosh, these players, people are going to start getting blocked by players. It's going to go sideways. South.
I would say the last thing just to talk and touch base on real quick was just that the trailer, violating his own thing, and he admitted it. Again, to your point, you need some sort of motivation, but at what point does that run out? At what point does that chip and that, everybody's looking down on you run out? And at what point aren't these players not motivated themselves? Like, why is it that, and this is just a general question, I'm not saying this is the truth, but why does it feel at times that Traylor is the one providing that motivation to the players when the players should be saying, we're establishing a new level of UTSA football, and that means that we expect to play at this level, and we're going to go out every single week and do that. That's what needs to be focused on, not the
Don't
the
eat
cheese. Yes,
Yeah.
I wanted to bring that up because I've been so hesitant to say it during the podcast, but I haven't really been a fan of it, mostly because I feel like it's kind of silly. It's great for the players, but if you're looking at it objectively, it should be easy for you to be able to say, this is what we believe this UTSA team can do. I don't think that you need to be able to be told, oh, you're eating the cheese because you picked us to win this week. No, I see the data beforehand, and it leads me to believe that this is the outcome that I think is going to happen.
Well, I think you have to motivate people in different ways. I mean, you can see it in the player interviews, the ones that are motivated and have that level of self-motivation, and the ones that maybe need somebody else to motivate them.
Right.
Like, if you listen to Charles Wiley in his interviews, like, you can tell he doesn't need Traylor to say that. Like, he just has an innate drive in himself, and he would respond the same way because he's driven internally versus somebody else. But that's not necessarily always going to be true.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of cap off this discussion, I'm glad you brought up Charles Wiley because I was going to bring it up too. Because I've been quite impressed, not only with this play on the field, but the fact that when he's interviewed, he really does a great job of giving his answers, and then he looks prepared when he's being asked questions, and it really shows that, to your point, he's got that focus. So we've kind of been dogging the players a little bit, but I would say in a very constructive way. Like, please don't get caught up in us making these silly projections. That's all they are. I would say try to be more like Charles Wiley there, who clearly is focused on one goal, and for him, I think it might be the NFL, and so you can see it in the way he discusses it with the media.
Absolutely.
Okay, now that we've kind of constructively criticized the players a little bit, let's talk about the players of the game. We're going to start on the defensive side first. And as always, we'll do our bootleg honorable mention. For me, it's going to go to Ken Robinson. He did have a 73.3 PFF grade, but he really had smart coverage throughout the game. And Ken's, I think, has really been a very good cornerback for UTSA. Last year, I was really impressed with him and the way he handled essentially run coverage. He was quite physical in pass coverage. He's been played really well. I always thought that he and Tariq were our two best corners and should be playing opposite each other. But Mayfield seems to have locked down the opposite corner, and so Tariq and Ken have been kind of splitting duties here. But it's one of those positions, again, much like the receivers, where you have three top-notch guys, or at least three really solid guys, and you have to find playing time for them, and it just becomes difficult, especially if teams aren't spreading you out.
Yeah, so today Traylor was asked in the post-practice interview about Ken Robinson and his play, and he said he's just kind of that player that comes and he does his job, he does the work, he makes the plays, and so he kind of referred to him as the silent assassin for that reason. So we've now got the babyface assassin
and receiving assassin,
yeah,
and the silent one,
and the silent assassin on defense.
So clearly Traylor's been listening to us. Thank you, Coach Traylor, if you are.
Yeah,
I'll send my tips for the offensive game plan this week in about 10 minutes. So for the defensive player of the game, it's Clarence Hicks. I mean, and it's not just because of the interception at the end, but his play has just really been impressive, especially since how disappointed the two of us were at the Illinois game when he got kicked out. Mm-hmm. He just, I don't know, he's got his head screwed back on, and when he did, he's really been the best pass rusher for UTSA. I mean, he's been getting to the quarterback of the season, as opposed to last season where he never seemed to quite get there. He'd make the moves and wouldn't get there. And this game, he really provided some great pass coverage. But even if you look at that last play, and if you get a chance to, I think it's on YouTube. The game replay, is on YouTube. But if you really deconstruct that last play, I watched it several times because I was so amazed at how he redirected one of the wide receivers and then dropped back in coverage, and then the ability and the concentration level to not only stretch out, make the catch, but then complete the catch to the ground. You laud wide receivers for that all the time. Clarence is a linebacker. This isn't what a linebacker does. You might, if this had been like Ken Robinson or Tariq or something, we'd be like, again, great play, but you would expect it a little more from them.
Well, especially Tariq, because he had been a wide receiver, right?
Right. But the cornerbacks, this is something that they're expected to do. Clarence is not expected to look so natural, and he looked like he was laying out for the pass for the first down. It didn't look like he was on defense. So, I know that I said, hey, it's not just because of the last play, but that last play was quite impressive, but it epitomized his play throughout the game. He had an 82.6 PFF grade, and again, just a top-notch pass rushing throughout the game.
One thing I was going to bring up about Hicks and his targeting call from the Illinois game. Traylor, after the Illinois game, had defended Hicks, and at the time I thought, it was a little kind of goofy for him to defend him, but he had said, the reason that, I'll defend that play is because he was going after the receiver and, wanted to make sure that he really, the knee had hit the ground, the guy was really down, because if he wasn't and he had gotten up and run for a touchdown, you guys would be making fun of me on social media. Well, that play literally happened this game. Not with Hicks, but the Western Kentucky receiver, it was their first possession after halftime. The Western Kentucky receiver, catches the ball, he's running, Wisdom goes and hits him, but he goes for the hit, and I think it was a running back. So Wisdom goes for the hit on the running back, but he doesn't tackle him, and somebody else came across, but I couldn't quite catch who it was. So the running back starts to go down, but his knee never hits, and he just kind of spins, and then he takes it in for a touchdown. It was that was exactly what Traylor was talking about with the Hicks targeting call. So one more piece of redemption there for Hicks as he gets his player of the game from us.
Yeah. So let's go to the offensive side. And we'll start out with the bootleg honorable mention, and that's Spencer Burford. He's been injured a few weeks here, and it was good just to see him back in the lineup. But once he got in the lineup, boy, was he was just dominant. He ends up grading out at 80.3 on the PFF. But man, he was tossing some Western Kentucky defenders around, and some good Western Kentucky defenders. I mean, I know we've dogged Western Kentucky in terms of their defense at times, but it was really their cornerbacks that had the issues, and really what brought down their defensive scores. Their linebackers and defensive line are pretty good, and they've got some good players there, and Spencer just took care of them. And again, his play helped free up time for Frank to deliver the passes to JT, to deliver the passes. And I'm singling out Spencer here, but the line itself, again, seemed to have a couple of injuries, yet they were still cohesive enough to bring it together. I just want to go back to what we've been saying. On the road, this team is just different. So good to see these guys play out there, especially for Spencer. Now, player of the game, it's actually be a co-player of the game. It's going to be JT and Frank. While Frank had a 92.7 PFF grade, JT had a 92 PFF grade. Essentially, they're both played elite games, but what really struck to me was the fact that they both just worked hand in hand in essentially getting UTSA over the top of Western Kentucky. I thought both of them, and JT just continues to astound every single week. I think we've gushed about him so many times about, his physicality, his ability to make catches. He had that one-handed touchdown grab from Frank, where Frank just put it in the just beautiful spot, and JT one-handed makes that catch, takes it in for the touchdown. And I felt bad for the cornerback, because the cornerback, granted, was holding JT's right arm, but still looked befuddled by the fact that somehow he got scored on.
Right.
Just incredible play. Frank, again, we've talked about, how he's been the, conductor of this offensive orchestra. He's just really known when to when he's needed something from some of his players, and the fact that he understands how to get the ball out and where to get the ball to for this team to make plays has just been quite impressive. And it just felt like he needed to outduel Bailey just so that we could say that this offensive unit was able to score enough points. And here we are.
Yeah, and how many times do you see a quarterback throw for 6 touchdowns, get a receiving touchdown himself, and force a fumble all in the same game? Crazy
stats from Frank, crazy stats from JT. Looking forward to see what kind of show they put together against Rice.
Yeah, absolutely. And have to mention, of course, JT got the school record 3 touchdown receptions in a game. So.
All right, well, this used to be called the breakout players section, but now we're just calling it the Ato's breakout players section because all of her players are still in play here, and obviously she made the better choices than I did. So let's start out on defense with Kalechi and Wachiku.
Yeah, Kalechi, again, he's getting limited snaps. I think he only played like 10 snaps this game. Seems like Jamal Sam has kind of come on and been a little bit more of the breakout player here, but he did get 2 solo tackles from those 10 snaps, so he's still trying to get some production off of the limited snaps that he's getting. But
and on those 2 tackles, I mean, he got a 76 in terms of his PFF grade, so it's above average grade, or I think an average grade, so he's still doing well there. One of the areas we had problems with last year was tackling, so the fact that he's actually making these tackles is actually really great. Let's talk about offense and your boy Oscar.
I mean, that's really the star of this show right here. He had 2 receptions for 19 yards, and he scored his first career touchdown. It was good to see him getting involved in the receiving game, not just the blocking. And then, that play that they ran where he scored the touchdown, of course, we mentioned it earlier, it came off of, kind of that crazy drive that we had earlier, but
interception, then forced fumble. Yeah. UTSA recovers, loses a couple yards, but it's 1st and 10.
Yeah, exactly. He, in that touchdown play, again, it was sort of I don't know if you want to call it a trick play, but kind of a trick play where they put Mekhi Hart out, almost lined him up like a wide receiver, and then, Cardenas lines up like he's, I think, at the right tackle, and then, obviously he goes out and scores the touchdown. And it was a similar play to what we saw, I think, against UTEP, where he didn't score, but he had a first down in that game. So.
Yeah, obviously Lunny went into that playbook and said it's time to get this bring this play back up, and I mean it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Lenny probably should be the breakout player, or the one of the players of the game, just for his play calling this whole series.
Well, I mean, maybe we should have done breakout coaches, but yeah, I think I would have chosen my man Barry, but again, great performance from Oscar.
Before we go, let's talk a little bit about Conference USA. Looking at the East, it seems like it's wide open right now. Charlotte's currently in the lead. A little bit surprising, although Marshall has a new coaching staff this year, that it took them to go to overtime this past game to beat Old Dominion. So that's a little bit surprising. But it seems like Charlotte, is the one to beat right now in the East. In the West, it's a little more competitive. Interesting to see that UTEP is so high in the ratings. They're 5-1, 2-0 in conference. Arguably their best start in a very long time. So the big question for them, looking at the rest of their schedule, is going to be, can they get that 6th win? Hopefully it won't come against UTSA. I doubt that would be the case, but it'll be interesting to see if UTEP can find one more win in their schedule.
And really, they're looking at potentially it being North Texas or Rice. I mean, that's
right.
It could be La Tech this weekend if they play well. But I think for me, if they did play well this weekend, it would at least legitimize them a little bit more, because they have not really been too impressive, at least to me, for against some of their opponents.
Sure. I mean, they've got a very weak schedule. The good thing for them is that they've taken advantage of that. The real question, I think, looking at the West for UTSA is going to be, can we put ourselves in position to beat the Texas trio for the first time. We've never beat Rice, UTEP, and North Texas in the same year. So your hot take, do you think we can pull it off this year?
I do. I do think that this would be the one year that we can do it because the three teams don't look very good. I'll get into the Rice here in a second, but in terms of UTEP and North Texas, I mean, we're on Seth Luttrell fire watch right now. I mean, I don't know how he survives this season, and you know, I'm really surprised that he wasn't able to sustain success.
Yeah, I mean, if you looked at the score this past week against Missouri, the score looks closer than the game. I mean, basically, North Texas got 3 trash touchdowns in the fourth quarter.
And that doesn't happen with UTSA. They don't give a trash. Oh wait, Middle Tennessee. I'm sorry. Anyway, and then with UTEP, you know, we just kind of talked about the fact that that you know they've had a weak schedule, but they've taken advantage of it. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I think with both UTSA and UTEP, you know, maybe they didn't have the toughest schedules, but you would get looked at as, well, why did you lose to this? You know, why did you lose to Middle Tennessee, or why did you lose to Western Kentucky? You know, Western Kentucky's 1-3, blah blah blah. So, you know, I think that at least from the UTSA end, they should be able to take all 3 teams. I'm not going to say that it's going to be blowouts every single one, but I do think that they can pull out the wins, and for the first time be able to be the Texas champs, I guess you could say.
That's right. All right, well, let's get into talking about Rice.
All right. Rice is tough to watch. And I say that on both sides of the ball, offensive and defensively. We'll start offensively. I like Mike Bloomgren. I thought the way he established immediately his, you know, intellectual brutality culture. You know, he brought it over from Stanford. So I thought he's going to turn this bottom rung team into, you know, a team that's going to essentially be better than UTEP and do what UTEP's been doing this year. Here's the problem. He's really missing the quarterback position. And you can't miss in the quarterback position. We know that, 2018, 2019. So, you know, if you're talking about the issues with UTSA in terms of their quarterback play, you see Rice struggling with it, and you're like, well, that's why Rice is where they're at right now. They're on their third quarterback, Jake Constantine, which is good because he has a 78.7 PFF grade. That is above average play. He's played the last 2 games, so and essentially the last 2 wins, which were Texas Southern and Southern Miss, who I don't know what's going on there, but Southern Miss has just been just abysmal.
I was going to say, they've been a dumpster fire
they
this
really
year.
have. You know, with Rice at least, I think they found their quarterback, but that doesn't mean that he's the best. Honestly, your other 2 quarterbacks, Wiley Green and highly touted Luke McCaffrey, have had the lowest PFF grades on the Rice offense this season, 46.3 and 46.1 respectively. That's poor play, and so that's why Rice is where they're at. Hopefully Jake at least can help them and be a little more respectable. You know, and I think to even make this even more of a, I guess, grave for Rice, or starting to dig the grave for Mike Bloomgren, their leading rusher is Jordan Myers. Okay, great. Except that he was a tight end up until this season. So you see how he's piecing together this team. He's really missed on a few, it looks like, prospects, and he's really kind of really struggled. The line has not been great. It really seems to have struggled. Most of their offensive line are really in the grayed out low, and so you see why they have been struggling. I mean, you got crappy quarterback play, and then your offensive line isn't any better. You know, their leading receiver is Jake Bailey. He seems like one of those smaller, kind of tough Rice wide receivers. He's going to be a little physical. I could be wrong, but that's what I remember kind of seeing from him. He just seems kind of pesky. The defense, again, tough to watch. Their defensive line is actually okay. Their linebackers, though, are not very good. And Blaze Aldridge would have been returning here for his final season, but he decided to go to Missouri.
And he just got benched.
Yeah. Well, and that's a shame. But, you know, if he was here at Rice, I think this would be a much more competitive game. The secondary is average. They're probably the defenders that grade out the best on PFF, but even then, that's not really saying much because it's not like they have high grades. I would say for Rice is, they talked about dominating the line and potentially, especially with intellectual brutality, you're talking about a team that's, physical or tries to be physical on both sides of the ball. You're talking about an offense taking on a UTSA defense that's probably their strength, is defending the run. So, it's if they can't really pass the ball with good quarterback play, they struggle with on the in terms of running the ball. It's gonna be a long game for Rice. Defensively, I struggle to see how the defensive line can really challenge the UTSA offensive line. And going back to what we were saying, trying to look at this objectively, you're trying to find a bright spot for Rice because, I'd like to be able to say, here my too early prediction, hey, watch out for this. But I can't find it. And that's, just tells you just the state of Rice football at this point. So with all that said, it kind of screams as a trap game because, it seems like UTSA is so dominant. There's been some stats out there that show them blowing out Rice.
We're an 18-point favorite right now. So.
Yeah, again, it kind of lines up with UNLV and kind of looking like that game. However, Rice has always historically played UTSA tough, and I think last year they would have beaten UTSA because UTSA was so beat up. There were so many issues going on, especially with COVID. I just got to go back to the fact that they just don't have good quarterback play. Again, I think Jake Constantine might be able to steady it. I just don't think Jake is going to be good enough to be able to beat a Corey Mayfield repeatedly, to throw at Tariq Woolen and be successful. Ken Robinson's coming off a great game, so you look at the UTSA defenders and it's hard to find a spot where they're going to get abused by the Rice offense. So I say give me a UTSA 38-16. Rice scores late to make it respectable.
You think Sincere's going to have a big game, or do you think it's going to be more in Frank?
I think we're going to see the passing attack. I think Rice is their secondary. While it's a strength, I just don't see them being able to shut down the receivers. So they're going to do what they can to stop Sincere.
All right. Well, hopefully it's going to be a fun homecoming game then.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Well, thanks for joining us on the Hail Married podcast. I'm Atoves.
And I'm the Toves.
We'll be back next week to recap our win against Rice.
Birds up.